I hope you can find my book if you like. Maybe the library has it. If you get it on Audible or something, I did narrate it myself because I listen to a lot of recorded books and it drives me crazy when things are mispronounced. So I might have an annoying voice, but at least it's my voice, right? So I'm going to go to, let's see, there's an order to do this. First, I do share screen. And then I do this. There we go. Is that good? Yeah. All right. So, when you give these talks or listen to these, I need to go to more talks and see what people do and pick up some tips. But anyway, you might wonder why it is that I wrote this book. So I'll start with that. Shut the door. So I have wanted to write this book for about 20 years. And I don't know if you have something that's been bugging you for that long. If you do, I really encourage you to do one of two things, either drop it or do it. And both of them are completely fine. Okay. I could leave the dog outside, but he would scratch at the door the whole time. So here he is. So I'd been talking about it for a long time. And a friend finally said, Joan, why don't you just drop it? This is driving you crazy. And I realized that really it was a better idea not to drop it, that it was important to me. And instead I should just overcome my time limitations and lack of confidence and just do it. So I did. So you might wonder, well, why slow birding? And why would an evolutionary biologist who used to work on wasps and now works on amoebas, of all things, with bacteria, why would I write a book about birds? And, why would I have the nerve to? And had the nerve to because I have lots of hope, lots of people that would tell me their stories. And I taught birds. I figured out pretty early that, teaching about wasps and amoebas was fine, but doing field work on wasps was not really that popular, and amoebas you couldn't really. So birds really grabbed the students. So I spent a lot of time teaching undergrads about birds. Okay, so why slow birding? Well, many of you may realize that this is a riff off the slow food movement, which started in Italy as a protest against a McDonald's, which went in right by the Spanish Steps in Rome. And besides the normal forms of protest, I'm guessing probably all of you have been in a protest or two. What they did was they cooked up big pans of delicious Italian pasta with a light tomato sauce, and they served that to the crowds outside saying, come on, we have our own food. Let's enjoy what we have. We don't need McDonald's. So I thought, we should have slow birding, where you stay home, you look at the birds, you pay attention, and learn about them. And so that's where I got the idea of calling it slow birding. And I just thought, you don't need to have a life list of thousands of birds if you can say, I really know that house wren that nested in my yard, or I really understand when the bluebirds are going to come back, or why birds are doing certain things. And plus, it's much more accessible. So I picked 16 really common birds. I located the work within 20 miles of St. Louis. By picking the common birds, it means I basically picked birds you can see anywhere in the eastern US and about half of them anywhere in the US. So all of my birds are in your area. I'll tell you a little bit more about how I. Is going to let me there. Yeah, so that's the slow food movement. You can actually join it. I'm sure you have a very active chapter in your area. So these are all things I've said. So when I was teaching I'm kind of a eccentric teacher, you might say, and I like to really empower the students. So for my first bird class, I just had them take 3 species of birds that nested right on, then I was at Rice University, right on the campus, and said, okay, go out, instead of spending your 4 hours in the lab pithing frogs or putting crickets through their rigmaroles or something, you go out, you look at these 3 species of birds and tell me how they use time and space. Now, that's a pretty general question. How does that behavior differ among the sexes? Now, this is a bit of a trick question because the mockingbirds and yellow-crowned night herons, which nested on campus, were not different by sex, whereas the gray-tailed grackles were. And then their third question was, what else would you like to know? We just went week by week building on the what else you would like to know as each of them developed their own project. And I didn't have them do formal write-ups and, methods, results, all that. I just said, just give me a narrative. Why obsess about the structure instead of the ideas? I also told them, don't look at any literature, just use your own ability to understand. And then the final project was simply to take something that you've looked at and count and do a statistical test to test your idea, and anyway, it was really a empowering class for me to teach and for them to take. And I wanted to bring this sort of attitude to a bigger community. So that's why if you actually get the book, one of the things that you will find is that at the end of every chapter, there's a list of things to do. So it's a book with homework. But that's my gift to you, ideas of things you can do to watch the birds in more detail. In another class, I also had them start blogging a little bit and writing for the public. I teach at really good schools. The students write extremely well. I have always felt that student writing should not end up in a teacher's drawer. So these students, I started this in 2010, and their writing was in blogs. I have since moved to, my students now write for Wikipedia, which is pretty exciting. So here's me getting the book, very exciting. So I told you, the book is about 16 miles around St. Louis. And I picked 20 miles, 16 birds, 5 places. I picked 20 miles and I picked 20. I know there's the Christmas count is 15 in diameter. I just picked 20 partly because I could capture some of the area where the Mississippi and the Missouri intersect and get some good places. So I like to think of my book as a contrast to something I call motorbirding, which is driving around and seeing as many birds as I can and not really necessarily watching them. And there's no judgment. It's a lot of fun to motorbird. I just want to say it's not the only way to look at birds. So the other thing I wanted to share with this book is I'm really a believer that students of all ages need to see where knowledge comes from. I think our democracy can actually be almost threatened if people think you can make up facts, if people don't get where knowledge comes from. And I think that we scientists are so often at fault because we're so desperate to tell all the facts, we forget that they're kind of meaningless if people don't understand where they came from. So to do that in my book, I tell the stories of the ornithologists and try to get into the spirit of, the people who, Karen Weeb up on a ladder, cutting a hole in a rotting aspen so she could look at flickers and their nests, things like that. I just feel like it makes the bird stories come alive to get to know the people that did the work. And I have to say that those people were incredibly generous with me. They would not only tell me their stories, some of them quite surprising, but then they also would proof my chapters and fix some, fairly embarrassing mistakes that were there in early chapters. So I told you, yes, there's activities. You can pretend you're a blue jay and look at acorns and see if you can take the caps off, because they always take the caps off first. You can see if you can tell which are the good heavy acorns and the other light ones that have been damaged by weevils and so aren't worth taking. So I just like to have fun with the birds. So I guess I'll pause at this point and see if are there any questions in the chat yet. So I'll tell you about maybe a couple of birds. I'll start with blue jay. It's the first bird in the book. So I love blue jays. When I lived in Houston, we moved from one house to another, and we found that at the new house, I parked the car once in the driveway, and this blue jay flew in and landed right on the edge of the car door. I was just amazed. And then I had some change and he landed on my hand, or she, and got rid of the coins that were copper, and flew off with the nickels and dimes and all, just flew off. So that was like just super amazing. So we had this money bird. My kids got to hold the money bird, and we just felt like blue jays were our bird. But there's other reasons that that blue jays can be special. They're likely to have been responsible for bringing the oak forests north in the country as the glaciers receded. So one thing that's really weird when you start thinking about North America and reading all these studies is study after study talks about what happened 10,000 years ago when the northern half of the country, just to a little north here of St. Louis, was covered in ice. And it was miles thick ice. It was ice so thick that now, even 10,000 plus years later, areas like Michigan and southern Canada are still bouncing back up measurably. So it's just kind of amazing. And blue jays, by carrying the acorns, flying off, were part of bringing the oak forests north. Blue jays get no respect. Honestly, I don't know why. They're not the state bird of any state. Cardinals, Western meadowlarks and northern mockingbirds each claim at least 6 states. It just seems so unfair. I just don't know why people don't like blue jays. So they're also famous for experiments by Lincoln Brower on looking at whether blue jays and by extension other birds had to learn that monarch caterpillars were not tasteful, and he had to go through a lot of work of taking naive blue jays and then raising some monarch caterpillars on cabbage so they were tasty, then trying them on a normally reared monarch caterpillar. And so those are fairly entertaining stories. So just think good thoughts about blue jays. They're out there. In the height of West Nile, we almost didn't see them, but fortunately they've rebounded. Think about all the sounds they make. They can make hawk sounds so convincing that they fool Merlin that there's a red-tailed or red-shouldered hawk nearby when there isn't. So track one for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is, if you're watching one bird and just trying to see everything it does, 5 minutes is quite a long time. So my daughter, she's a professor of sociology at Indiana University. She says, Mom, you have to read from your book if you're going to give a book talk. So here's a little piece from the book to give you a flavor of it. Perhaps my most exciting sighting of blue jays was further north, close to the northern edge of their range. Whitefish Point in Michigan reaches into Lake Superior, pointing northwards towards Canada. On a surprisingly cool day, June 9th, 2009, tendrils of mist twisted over the water, sometimes obscuring and sometimes opening the pounding shore to my eyes. Out of these vapors, blue jays flew, pummeling across the water in clumps of 5 or 6, then moving into the trees to rest after crossing the great lake the Ojibwe called Gitchigami. Every time I looked away, another group flew into view, their blue punctuating the haze. I counted over 80 blue jays on that foggy day during a boreal flora mini course I was taking from Ed Voss at the University of Michigan Biological Station. Then I did not even know the glacial connection between lakes, blue jays, and forest. So that's a little taste of blue jays. I think they can, I can't remember the exact number, but I think they can carry 4 or 5 acorns in their mouths at once. Nothing like what pinyon jays can carry, pinyon seeds. They can carry like, I forget, 20 or 30, and Clark's nutcrackers can carry even more. And they've all evolved special ways to do that. You gotta love the robins. They're so common. They're everywhere. They're just really fun. I did a little test with my middle son on think of a bird using Merlin, and he thought of a bird. And then I said, okay, and I asked the Merlin questions of how big is it and what are the main colors and everything. And and Merlin guessed robin, and it was right. And then I did the same thing with my husband, and he was also thinking of a robin. So we've clearly got robins on our mind. Yeah, by the way, I didn't mention, but blue jays may not be the state bird of any state, but they're one of the top 5 or so birds that we Google. So we're curious about them at least. So Bob Montgomery, and he was one of the best people to read my chapters and tell me all my mistakes. He was really very patient with me. So he and Pat Weatherhead were sitting at a field station in Canada where they decided to do a classic experiment on robins and figure out how they found their worms. So they titled the paper How Robins Find Worms and tested vision, sight, vibrations, and sound to see how they actually found them. And they had to do this with fairly elaborate tests. They built an outdoor aviary in which they did it. And they used mealworms, not worms, because they were easier to manage. And ultimately, they found that it was sound at the end of the day that they actually used to find their birds. So to figure, they had various techniques for figuring it wasn't the other things, and to figure out that it was sound, they took a tiny speaker, put it in a cloth bag, and buried it in the tray of soil. And then the birds couldn't find their worms. So there's lots of great stories about American robins. Apparently they have active, what I might call dating lives. Nearly half the young in a nest are not sired by the male that diligently tends them, bringing them worms and fruit until the young can forage on their own. To figure this out, Patrick Weatherhead and his graduate student, Karen Rowe, used DNA markers, just like those that we use when we sign up for 23andMe or Ancestry or one of those kinds of tests. So another really crazy thing that Bob Montgomery and his student Felina English discovered is that fathers take better care of babies that hatch from bluer eggs. The blue comes from a pigment called biliverdin, which could signal better female health. They studied if males took better care of bluer eggs in a really cool way. They took all the eggs from the nests, all of them from their whole sample of, 20 or 40 nests, some big number, and put them in incubators. Then they replaced them in the nests with clay eggs. And in some, they put them bright blue and others dull blue clay eggs. So this is like perfectly controlled. And the mother robins were happy to incubate their clay eggs. Then about the time the birds were due to hatch, they put the real eggs back in the nest, scrambling them around so that there was no preference. So then asked the question whether the fathers would care more when there had been bluer clay eggs all during the incubation. Now, Montgomery he's a great scientist, and he was following up on someone else's study on a different bird. He did not think it was going to work, but he surprised himself. There was an effect. For the first 3 days of life, the fathers cared more for the young in the nests where there were bluer eggs. And that may not sound like much time, but those 3 days are really crucial. I don't want to do that. Let's see. Okay, so not quite done with robins. So I have another story. This time is from a friend. So I've always liked to understand the social networks behind birds. And I have a friend named Sarah Coker who studies bees that I know from my WASP times. She was an undergrad at University of Illinois and is now a professor at Princeton. So things went pretty well for her. And she was acknowledged in one of the robin papers on parentage. So I emailed her. And here is what she said. It's what she emailed me back. American robins. Yes, this was my first foray into behavioral ecology. I took a class with Pat Weatherhead and realized how much I adored animal behavior. I signed up for a summer project with one of his grad students, Karen Rowe, and it literally changed my life. It was pretty typical birding field work, waking up at 4 a.m. to go out to our site, search for nests, set up cameras to record behaviors, miss nets to capture birds, band them, and draw blood for paternity analysis, and a field spec to measure the intensity of each bird's plumage color. Once I'd finished that first cup of coffee, I genuinely loved every minute of it. It was because of Karen and her amazing mentorship that I realized I really had a passion for studying animal behavior. And that summer was the first time I really started to contemplate grad school as a viable path forward. The study also happens to be how I met my partner, Julien. He came to the field site one day to bring Karen lunch, and we started talking, and I guess the rest is now ancient history. So yes, this project literally changed my life. How exciting to think it may one day end up in a book written by you. That seems like a wonderful way to close the loop. So that was really gratifying that she said. So anyway, don't worry. You're not two birds done and 14 to go, because I'm going to change gears here a little bit. Oh, I seem to have lost my picture of my artist. So anyway, I want to talk about my artist. So there are drawings in the book, like this one of Cooper's hawks. They're very nice ink drawings of the birds. And I was determined to get a really excellent artist, but as much as that, I also wanted to get someone who was not all well connected into the community. I wanted drawing my pictures to be a start for a young artist. And I had a student who was an undergrad who did research in our lab, but I knew he was an artist, and he had just such an amazing website that I was hesitant to ask him to just draw birds. So his site is called fadingroyalty.com. His name's Anthony Bartley. He's a young African-American Chicagoan, but he came down here to St. Louis for college. So he's the one that did the illustrations. It was the first book he did. And the reason I felt comfortable asking him was he'd asked me for a letter of recommendation for a scientific art program. So I thought, oh, well, if you're going to make your money that way, you might as well, you might be interested in this. And he was. And he's now working for WashU's OB-GYN department and, drawing all kinds of things for them, which are also scientific. So I skipped his picture. I modified the talk today for you guys, and I guess I managed to lose it. Anyways, so here's just a couple of tips on watching birds. I think Merlin is fantastic. I love Merlin. It's free. It's on your phone. You can just have it tell you what birds it's hearing. I don't always trust it. As I said earlier, it's sometimes we'll hear birds that aren't really that aren't there. I talked to the eBird and Merlin guys as to how they do this, and they said they actually take little tiny pieces of the song. They don't take long pieces. They take lots of little snips is how they put it together. But it's a really great program. And then I am also a believer in citizen science of all kinds and in logging your birds on eBird. You can also do that on your phone as you go. You just tap to add it birds. So I'm always flipping between Merlin and eBird in my observations. And I told you I bird with really common birds. I've been doing, so if someone says, oh, what did you see? I say, saw 5 starlings, and they just like walk away. But actually right now in our local park, we have a bunch of rusty blackbirds, which is kind of unusual. So I like to make my walks at least 15 minutes to log for eBird. And I've been doing something lately, which is I'll do my little circuit around the park, 15 to 20 minutes. And then, to my dog's dismay, I will do the exact same walk again. And then I'll have 2 bird walks that differ only by 15, 20 minutes. I start a new eBird, so then I have 2 that I can compare and see which birds I missed the first or the second time. It's just fun for me. So eBird and Merlin, I love them. So I suppose another thing I might talk about is backyard feeders. I know that they can be controversial. We certainly don't want to create stockyards where all the birds get sick from our food. So I think there's different things that you can do. I think the most important is to see what your local Audubon Society recommends. I know that they recommend cleaning your feeders well. My favorite way of feeding is to have lots of native plants. I can see the birds on the flowers and lots of hummingbird plants, but I do have feeders. I also strew seeds on the ground where they can eat more spaced, and I clean my feeders. So one of the things I think is really important is for conservation, for the future of our country and our planet, is for people to understand what's out there and to care about the animals, and birds are among the most visible. So anyway, yeah, I think feeders used judiciously are fine. Some people want to know how I write. And, you hear lots of writers that get up at 5 a.m. and write for 3 hours and then do the rest of their day or this or that. And I've always had a really busy life. And so I don't have any time of day that I write. When I started this project, I made a promise to myself that I would never work on my book when I had a student's paper waiting to be read. And so I've kept to that. And for me, I feel like if you're doing something you love, you can use any scrap of time that you have to get busy with it and work on it. So that's pretty much how I've done it. So at this point, I can see if there's more questions. I can talk about other birds. I can talk about whichever birds you want of the 16 that I wrote about. I've got snow goose and white-throated sparrow queued up, but I can talk also about any of the others. So I can read you what they are, or you can suggest something and I'll let you know if it's in the list. I can keep going. What do you want? I can quit too, of course.
No, please don't quit. I'd love to have you talk about some of the other birds that we're all likely to see.
Okay.
And Idris has written, please talk about the white-throated sparrow.
All right, I can do that. So I can come back to snow geese. Here's the white-throated sparrow. This is one of the very, very coolest birds there are. So this bird had, there's all this talk these days about gender, and there's all kinds of new ways we need to respect people and understand what their gender issues are and their gender choices, and I'm totally for that. What we don't have is what the white-throated sparrows have, and that is that they have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 sexes. I'm talking genetic sexes where you don't to have babies, go through meiosis, have the next year's chicks. If you are a white morph, like this one over here with this white eyebrow, you have to mate with someone of the opposite sex as we usually construe it, who has a tan line here. So the tan ones, on the other hand, can mate with other tans. So birds have sex chromosomes. So women have two X's and men have an X and a Y. In birds, the females are the sex that has two different sized chromosomes. What happened in these white guys over here is they have a huge thing we call a chromosomal inversion, which is a piece of their chromosome just got flipped. It's still there, but it's in the opposite order, so it can't recombine in meiosis. And it's a problem. So, all right, big deal. There's lots of chromosomal aberrations out there in the world. Why should we even care about that? Well, I'll tell you one reason is that this white male is kind of a jerk. He's very aggressive. He has the best territories that he defends super vigorously. And he's also a philanderer. He's not faithful to his female. Well, lots of birds are philanderers. Robins are philanderers. So no big deal. So he has all those behavioral differences. And it turns out they're due to one gene that's in that flipped area. This one, say it's a male, with the tan, he's got a bigger territory. It's not as good. He's faithful to his female. He's a better father. The white one also cares for the young less. So they have these huge behavioral differences. Now, this tan guy, he could mate with a tan female or a white one. But if he mates with a tan female, this white guy can come over and, mate with his female. If he mates with a white female, this white male can't mate with her. I mean, he's evolved to know that. So he's safer. So isn't that crazy? Isn't that just a bizarre story? So also kind of satisfying is this is one that Audubon got wrong. So Audubon's painting of the white-throated sparrow has this white guy on the left be the male and this tan one be the female, and it's wrong. So that's let's see, that's kind of cool. So here's another story about these guys, and this one is again just crazy, is out on the West Coast. So their song, do you know their song? They're the ones, I like to say it, pure, sweet, Canada, Canada, Canada is their song. Some people say old Sam Peabody, 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 but I like the Canada version. So that's their song. So just remember that, pure, sweet, Canada, Canada, Canada. So there were some birds out west that started singing a shorter song, and it kind of took off like the new rap music. And so they were singing pure, sweet, canna, canna, canna instead. And so then the very next year in the Adirondacks, not so far from you, were males that started singing this new song. And, British Columbia and New York are kind of far apart. Well, these days they can put little tags on birds, and they figured out that they were flying south and wintering in the same grounds, and they learned that new song. So anyway, yeah, it's just kind of crazy. So someone wants to know about wrens. wrens. House wrens are in my book if you want to hear about house wrens. Here's a little house wren. House wrens are really, really hard to get out of nets, out of mist nets. They're really feisty. And I had house wrens in the backyard in my nest box. I had to put a big metal washer around it so that the squirrels wouldn't just enlarge the nest, the hole, and then nest in there. So yeah, there's lots of cool things about house wrens. Let's see which ones I might want to tell you about. So here's one thing that they studied is one of the sort of classic questions about birds is whether they lay exactly the number of eggs that they could lay, or if they could lay more. And there's a guy named David Lack who had the Lack's hypothesis, which was that they lay exactly the number of eggs that they can, and that if you add eggs, fewer of them will survive because they won't be able to take care of them as much. And so there's a bunch of people studying house wrens. There's a group just north of here at Illinois State that study them a lot. And one of the things that they did was they looked at this Lack hypothesis and they added eggs to house wren nests and found that they were able to rear more than the 4 eggs that they usually lay just fine, up to 6 or 7 that they could do just fine. So then it's a question of, well, why haven't they evolved to lay more? And the answers to these sorts of questions always take you deeper into the biology. And so what these guys then realized was when they added the eggs, they hadn't added the cost of producing them. And so then what they did was they started taking eggs out of the nest, keeping them in an incubator, or I can't remember what they did, but they for sure didn't kill them. And having I know what they did. They put them, so they'd have the female have to lay the extra eggs. So they'd have a female lay 2 or 3 extra eggs, just replacing to get the number she wanted. Then they put those eggs back. And so they had the full cost of rearing the additional babies, including producing the eggs. And then they saw that there was a cost to the female of producing those eggs. So that's a wren story. Someone asks, how do I attract other than wrens to my birdhouse? Most people want wrens, but I guess chickadees are great, as are bluebirds. I think the answer is to probably post that on something local and see if your wren house is high enough, close enough to shelter, or far enough from shelter, those sorts of things. But so I don't know. My wren house has been empty for the last 2 years, so I would be delighted if I get wrens this year. So tell me if you want more birds, if you want to open this up. Okay, someone, actually Twyla, who is my youngest son's partner, is asking me if I did any bird banding during my research for the book. So that's very nice of her to ask. So actually, I did not. I did not do any bird banding for this book. My son, who is her partner, has actually worked on birds. He's done a lot of bird banding. I have since the book, and partly during it, I have banded with an 83-year-old bird bander up in Michigan, and I just love sitting outside with him and banding. And it's just really important for us to know what we have. I always say to people that feel uncomfortable with catching birds and putting little bands on them and stuff, you can't save what you don't understand. And sometimes how we understand things is surprising, but it's a really important thing to do. So anyway, so yeah, maybe I'll write another book on bird banding. So the bird of prey that's in my book, someone asked about this, is Cooper's hawk. So here is a Cooper's hawk. Some people hate it when they come visit their feeders. I find it kind of exciting. Cooper's hawks have to eat too. So these are fascinating birds. So if you look at this picture and you look at the toes, you see how this middle toe here is really long. So it turns out that Cooper's hawks here and then on the West Coast eat a lot of birds, whereas in Nebraska area, I think it is, I may have these wrong, but somewhere they eat fewer birds. And it turns out that where they eat birds, they have a longer middle toe, so they can snatch the birds out of the air. Whereas when they pounce on mammals, they're actually a lot easier to catch. So the guy that studied Cooper's hawks, let's see if I can find my Cooper's hawks notes. Cooper's hawks. There we go. So another cool thing about Cooper's hawks is they take mating pretty seriously. Now, so all birds mate quite often. Often a male will mate with a female when he comes back. There's a lot of infidelity in birds, so they do that. Cooper's hawks really take it to an extreme where they can mate hundreds of times. And this was work done by Bob Rosenfield, who saw them, and they looked at 44 nests, 140 young, and found that 20% of them were fathered by a male, not the female's partner. So that's why they're so they mate so often, is they're just trying to drown out anybody else's sperm. One thing Cooper's hawks have that's really neat is you may see them at your feeder. If they're at your feeder, they're nesting not too far away, and they will have something called a plucking post. And I found one over the sidewalk on my walk to work. I live about a mile from campus. And it's just a spot that they go to sort of dismember their prey. And then they pull off the feathers and stuff, and then they take it to their babies. So one other really cool thing about birds of prey is most birds, the young, when they've hatched out of the nest, they're in the nest for as short a time as possible, because you have all the babies right there and they could be predated. Whereas if they've fledged, even if they're totally dependent still on their parents and they go in the bushes, if one gets eaten, another could still hop away. Well, this isn't such a problem for hawks, eagles, and birds like that. So you can have a Cooper's hawk nest high in the tree, and even when the babies are out of the nest, and even if they can fly a little bit, they'll often just kind of hang around, lying on the branches around the nest and waiting for their parents to bring them food. So I think that's probably enough bird stories. What do you think? Are there other questions? I'll flick through some other pictures. These are all in my book. Great egrets, flickers eating ants, juncos, northern mockingbird, house sparrows, cedar waxwings, yellow-rumped warbler. There's its yellow rump. Northern cardinals. This is my youngest son. He's not that young anymore, but he's holding the bird absolutely correctly. European starlings, coots. I think that's the last one. So there's lots of great birds. Planting for birds, I plant native plants. I have, I just plant natives. A lot of them are in the aster family, black-eyed Susans and things like that. But again, here we have the Audubon Society will advise people on the kinds of things to plant. So yeah, my yard gets, in my little part of St. Louis, we're allowed to have wild yards, but I still get kind of notes from the city every now and then. I have to protest and say, no, actually, those are not weeds. I paid thousands of dollars for all those plants. So leave me alone.
I have heard that in our part of the country that the depredations from the deer are eating a lot of the sort of mid-growth that the birds depend upon.
I bet that's true. Yeah. Those lower plants, bushes and things are where the fledglings go. And yeah, the deer are out of control. Yeah. Need more hunters, more wolves or coyotes or whatever it is takes out the deer.
Right. Yeah. Are there any more questions? Any more? Has climate change impacted migration?
Yes, it certainly has. It's a huge topic. It's a huge problem because the birds migrate north according to sort of the sun and stuff like that. And the caterpillars will hatch out according to temperature, and they need those caterpillars to eat. So it's a huge topic in the ornithological research community. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joan. This has been marvelous. It's been lots of fun. And I'm going to go pay more attention to what lands on my bird feeder. What about suet? Is that acceptable?
Oh, suet's excellent. Suet, oranges, all that. Yeah, suet's great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything else you want to say? We will also look for your book.
Bears and raccoons. I wish we had bears here. We have a few raccoons. Yeah. Actually, my son, who did research on birds, had a huge amount of problem with raccoons. And what he ended up doing, and he can put it in the chat if I'm wrong, is he greased the pole. He used metal poles away from anything else. And I don't know if he greased them, but it was kind of, that was what he used to keep the raccoons away. Bears, I don't know what to say about bears. Maybe you have them hibernating under your decks. Oh, Vaseline and chili powder, he says.
Vaseline and chili powder. Does it wash off in the rain?
Oh, interesting. And I know we're up on the hour. If this is fascinating, Joan, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. You just said about migration. I was very alarmed a couple weeks ago. So maybe 3 weeks ago, like the third week of February, I saw a lot of robins in my yard. And I was like, oh, they're way too early. And is there something we should do to feed them or help them out before the worms start coming up?
So robins only need worms in any kind of number when they have babies in the nest. And so they'll be eating fruits. There's plenty of still dried up looking fruits around that they will eat. Robins are the kind of migratory where they will go shorter distances. So whether they're coming from the north or the south could be unclear, because they could just have a storm in north of you and come down. So I've got tons of robins in my park. I don't think they're the same ones every day, but I wouldn't worry about robins.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such an interesting talk. Thank you.
So for catching, someone asks how we catch the birds. We use something called mist nets, which are thin nylon. And usually if you look around, you can often find a bird banding operation not too far from you. They're all over the country. And of course, you have to be really well trained to band them and take them out of the nets, but they'll often hand them to you to let the birds go. And that's really a lot of fun.
Oh, sure.
So anyway, thank you. Hope you have a good evening.
Thank you. It was a lovely, lovely talk. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Joan. Before everybody leaves, I want to remind you that we've had some wonderful talks in March, and we have one more coming up on March 28th. Elan Wu, who wrote something very different. This one is entitled Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, and it is about a couple before the Civil War who escaped slavery and journeyed to the North. And it has Joan's book reviewed in the New York Times and gotten wonderful reviews as well. So thank you, Joan. Thank you very much for doing this, and good luck with all of your research.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.